Welcome everyone to our Tuesday night Southwest Writers meeting. And tonight our speaker is Bob Kidera. And Bob is going to be talking about taking the mystery out of mystery writing. And I've been looking forward to this one because unlike most of you, I've read maybe 3 mystery books my whole life. And so I'm kind of in the dark about it. So he's going to be looking at becoming familiar with the genre, understanding the details of the crime and police procedures, defining any unfolding conflict, creating compelling characters, playing fair with the reader, integrating setting into your mystery, plot twists, misdirection, dead ends, red herrings, all those kinds of things, and comparing different mystery writing processes and finding which one works best for you. So we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. And all right, I'm going to hand it over to you, Bob. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Brenda. When Brenda first asked me to speak tonight and talk about mysteries for an hour, I realized that that's really kind of an impossibility. So I kind of narrowed this down a little bit, and I tried to find a way to approach mystery writing that perhaps some of you haven't taken before. And what I decided to do was, and we'll get around to the topics that she mentioned, but what I decided to do was to take a look at some of the decisions that need to be made before you start writing, before the finger hits the keyboard. In my case, it's the index finger, or before the pencil hits a blank sheet of paper. You can do things that prepare you for success. And so I put together a little bit of a examination of some of the questions that might help us demystify the entire process. And I think we're right. You want to go to that first slide?
Yep, I'm trying. I'm sorry, Bob. It's misbehaving. I'm working on it.
Oh, okay. Okay. So we're going to take a look at what you need to do before you start. We're going to look at how you figure out where to start, and some of the choices that have to be made before you actually start writing. Because I'm not getting into the pantser versus the plotter thing. What I like to do is to take a look at commonalities, things that all of us need to answer for ourselves before we start writing. Okay, I'm ready for the first slide whenever you are.
Oh, and I'm trying, and it will not. Tonight's the night for weirdness with PowerPoint. Okay, we'll try it one more time here.
Can you hit slideshow at the top?
Yep.
There you go.
Yep, and it's just not showing up on the screen. I'm telling it to show up at.
Back up.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I can work if you just click on that, and then right. I'll work from that, and you'll have a little preview of the next slide. Okay. So what I'm basically dealing with here are basic design decisions, things that you want to pay attention to before you start to write. Here are some first thoughts that have come to me. Now, understand, my first book came out 6 years ago. I started writing after I took early retirement, and my 6th book will be out after the first of the year. So I've been very busy. I've taken kind of an intensive course, self-taught course here. So I'm not presenting myself to you as an expert, but I am sharing with you what I have discovered on my writer's journey. First of all, keep in mind that all fiction, all genres are manufactured reality. and that what we are as writers, true, we have skills, but we also need to be magicians. We're conjurers. Good fiction is born of the skills that we possess. But I think great fiction is born of our ability to weave magic and transfer that magic from our mind to the page, to the heart and mind of our reader. What we are doing when we write mysteries is we are creating a world, we are conjuring up characters, none of which have ever existed before. Now that's really significant. You are creating something that no one has seen before, unless you're plagiarizing, I guess, but you're creating a world and you are inviting the reader to join you in it. And what the skilled writer does is draw the reader into that world and make it real for them. Take it from your mind as an author and put it down on paper or on a screen, which is a two-dimensional world. But the real artistry comes, and you know you've done it right, when that two-dimensional printed word becomes a three-dimensional real world in the mind of your reader. And one thing I have found is that you can make that happen more likely if you refuse to write at arm's length. Nothing in our enterprise is done at arm's length, not the writing and not the reading. So when you write, whatever story it is, whatever character, whatever scene it is, you want to inhabit it and write it from the inside out. And if you've ever seen a young child, maybe a 4 or 5-year-old who has just learned how to read, you can see what's going on. They don't hold the book at arm's length. You'll see that child bent over the book, almost with their eyes perhaps too close to the page. It's something they're almost physically trying to crawl into. And that is what we want to achieve when we write fiction. And our success has to be planned. Lasting success, I think, is always planned. It's not accidental. Some people say, well, somebody got the breaks and I didn't. Somebody had luck. Sometimes. But lasting success, that kind of lasting luck, is the residue of our design. And so what we want to pay attention to before we write is we want to have a design in mind and how we're going to tell this story and how we're going to get it from our head to the head of the reader. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, here's the first decision. You probably heard somebody say, what's the difference between a mystery and a thriller? Well, there's some overlap, but I believe each of these major genres is distinct. A mystery is a story about a puzzle. A crime is committed or has been committed, all right? And the question in the mind of the reader is who did it? Perhaps why? And clue leads to clue leads to clue. If you are writing a mystery, the process inside the mind of the reader is just that, it's cerebral. They are connecting the dots, they are connecting information. If you're doing a thriller, thrillers are about adrenaline. Something bad happens and we very often know who did it right away. But the question is it going to happen again, or what are the stakes? They can be either intimate if it's a psychological thriller, or they could be some kind of global catastrophe. And the question that the thriller reader has is what's going to happen next? And whereas in a mystery, the clue leads to clue, in a thriller, the tick leads to tock. Time passes, and each passing second takes us closer to that question. Can we stop something from happening? What's going to happen next? Will we get there in time? It's not so much happening in the mind of the reader as it is in the gut of the reader. Okay, so the first distinction I'd like to make in this area of fiction is distinguishing between a mystery and a thriller. Now, there's overlap, and my little note at the bottom there, publishers often feel that since thrillers have a bigger market than mysteries, they sometimes slap the label of thriller on something that really is more of a mystery. So you get these mystery / suspense / thrillers. The differences I hold between a mystery and a thriller are fundamental, and they're real. So your first decision is what exactly is it that I'm writing? Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, now I'm not going to go over all of this, but the next decision, once you've made that first basic choice, is choosing a subgenre. All right, and I've got some genres listed here. I've got some notable writers in those genres, because if you're writing in a genre, you do want to know what has preceded you and what has worked and what has been successful and what kind of approaches some of the great writers have taken. So if you're writing a crime novel or a police procedural or a hard-boiled or a noir, a psychological thriller, a cozy, spy thriller, political thriller, techno thriller, mystery, historical mystery, legal or medical thrillers, ancient conspiracy thrillers, romantic suspense, or a recent arrival, which is kind of the environmental or the echo danger thriller, check out what already exists in that subgenre and become familiar with it. Those lists of suggested writers there are certainly not exhaustive. It's mostly the people that I am familiar with and that I've read. But I do an awful lot of reading. I do as much reading as writing, and I would recommend that you all do the same. Okay, next one. Now, where do you start? The third decision is establishing your starting point. And obviously you're starting on page 1, but where does the story begin? That's where your book begins, but where does the story begin? And why does it begin there? And what time is it? What date is it? And what kind of scene are we in when it starts? Now, when I first started and wrote my first novel, Red Gold, I thought I had nailed the starting point of the story. And what was page 1 when I started out eventually became chapter 4. And I realized that I should have thought this through more and realized that I am joining a story in medias res, in the middle of things. You don't have enough time with a reader or with a publisher or with an agent to kind of crank up the old car and say, okay, I got it started now. You just wait till we get to page 17 and this story gets started. You're going to love it. They will never get there. Okay, so you want to pick the most dramatic point, the most emotional point to start your story, because you have a page or 2 pages to connect with your reader or your publisher or your agent or whomever. Some of you may know Steve Brewer. He's a member of SouthWest Writers. And one of the things that he told me when I was starting out is tip number 1 there. And that is, start each chapter or scene by getting in late and getting out early. You do not need to set every scene. You do not need to explain it all before you drop the reader into the middle of it. Sometimes you want to throw them right into the water and get in late. Something is in the process of happening or has just happened, and get out early. Once the scene has concluded, you don't need to wrap everything up before going on to the next chapter. Now, in the hands of an artist, this can be very, very effective and can almost ensure that your book will get a good reading right off the bat. And I'm going to read an example for you right now. If you go to the next scene, please, next slide, please. Back up, there we are. Lawrence Block is one of my favorite writers. He's one of our greatest traditional mystery writers. He writes the Matt Scudder series, among other things, which is about an ex-cop with a drinking problem, an ex-wife, and 2 kids living in an apartment in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan and trying to make it as a private eye. Now, some of that sounds kind of old hat, but watch what he does here in this book called The Burglar in the Rye. And he's going to set us down he's going to tell us all that, where we are, what time it is, etc. But watch the way he does this. And I've highlighted some words in red that I'd like you to notice. The lobby was a bit the worse for wear. Right away, the lobby. We know as a reader, we're in a lobby of some kind. The large oriental carpet had seen better days, lots of them. Now that's a nice little beat, that lots of them. He could have said the large oriental carpet had seen a lot of better days. But it gives it a little emphasis after that comma, lots of them, reinforces the first half of that sentence, punches it up. The facing Lawson sofas sagged invitingly, and like the rest of the furniture showed the effects of long use. They were in use now. 2 women sat in animated conversation, and a few yards away, a man with a long oval face and a high forehead sat reading a copy of GQ. He wore sunglasses, which made him look dapper and sly. I don't know how they made the magazine look. Dark, I suppose. Well, now, bang, right away, he's got me, all right? Because our point of view character is a guy with some sass, okay? So we now know who's talking to us, not by name or anything else, but by attitude. While the lobby may have been the least bit down at the heels, the overall impression was not so much of his shabbiness as of comfort. The glow of a fire in the fireplace, a welcome sight on a brisk October day. Now we know the time of year. Put everything in the best possible light, and centered above the fireplace, painted with such oil-tromping realism you wanted to reach out and pick him up and hug him, was the hotel's namesake. A little bit of a mystery there. He was a bear, of course, but not the sort whose predilection for sylvan defecation is as proverbial as the Holy Father's Catholicism. All right, now he's got me completely here. Does the bear shit in the woods? Is the Pope Catholic? This guy's really got an attitude. This bear, one saw at a glance, had never been to the woods, let alone behaved irresponsibly there. He was wearing a little red jacket, and he had a floppy royal blue rain hat on his head, and his legs ended in a pair of Wellington boots the color of a canary, and every bit as cheerful. There's the physical description. He was perched on a shelf between a battered Gladstone grip and a shopping bag from Harrods. Aha, it's London. And a stenciled sign overhead proclaimed, left luggage. But I don't need to go on, do I? If you didn't have such a bear yourself, surely you knew someone who did. For this was Paddington Bear himself, and who else could it be? Who better to grace the lobby of the legendary Paddington Hotel? There you go. This is our starting point. Lawrence Block has put us into it. He's helped us see it. Now, he could have very easily said, on a brisk October day, in the lobby of the Paddington Hotel in London, ... And then, two women were talking and a man was reading a magazine. But look what he does. Look how he takes this, fleshes it out, includes some humor, hints at the narrator, and does it all as a way of establishing his starting point. All right, it's really, this is the magic right here. Now, that's the first choice. One of your first choices when you start to write is, where do I begin my story? Let's go to the next slide and we'll look at another decision we have to make. And that is defining your protagonists. Now, it used to be that your protagonist really had to be likable or else your reader couldn't identify or empathize with them. That's not so true anymore. We have a greater variety of protagonists, I'm happy to say. But you still have your traditional hero protagonists. You have anti-hero protagonists. You have multi-protagonists and what's called a heroic antagonist. Now, this is our first decision point with regard to character. And I can't emphasize this enough. I have found more than anything else that character trumps plot. And in a mystery, especially if you're writing a series, it's the characters that sustain the connection between the writer and the reader. So your story equals character plus conflict, and all stories are character driven. The most important character is, of course, the protagonist. So let's look at what it used to be like with the next slide. Traditional protagonists, when the mystery genre really got cranked up in the 20s and 30s and it became very popular, you had traditional protagonists, and I've taken two of Agatha Christie's here, Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot. They are stand-ins for the reader, okay? And as they go through the clues, so do we. And they reflect what we like to think are the best aspects of ourselves. They're altruistic, they're principled, intelligent, they have strong character, a sense of justice and reliability. That's what it used to be like. And you still see traditional protagonists, I would say mostly in, more often anyway, in cozy mysteries than in the other subgenres. Next slide, please. After the Great Depression and World War II, we see the emergence of a different kind of hero, what they call the hard-boiled hero, the detective fiction. Hard-boiled mysteries took root, and one of the great practitioners, of course, was Raymond Chandler, who took what had been really pulp literature, 10-cent magazine stories, and he exalted them into what I would say was a literary form, into real literature. He was asked in 1950, what is the hero? Who's the protagonist? What's he gotta be like, or she? Now, Raymond had problems with women in his private life and also in his books, so please bear with me here, but this is the way he wrote it. He said, "Down these mean streets a man must go, who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid. He is the hero. He is everything. He must be a complete man and a common man, and yet an unusual man. He must be, to use a rather weathered phrase, a man of honor, by instinct, by inevitability, without thought of it, and certainly without saying it. He must be the best man in his world and a good enough man for any world. He will take no man's money dishonestly and no man's insolence without a due and dispassionate revenge. He is a lonely man, and his pride is that you will treat him as a proud man or be very sorry you ever saw him. The story is this man's adventure in search of a hidden truth, and it would be no adventure if it did not happen to a man fit for adventure. If there were enough like him, the world would be a very safe place to live in, without becoming too dull to be worth living in. Now, Raymond Chandler, this is kind of an interesting concept for the hero. It's a blend of the modern and the romantic. And Raymond Chandler, of course, an American who was educated in England, he got an old classical English education and studied medieval history. And so his version of the hero is kind of that, the knight, right? The knight in shining armor, the slumming angel. And yet what he's doing is he's creating a modern urban version of that. Now, this picture of the hero was found in many mysteries in the 40s and 50s, but it fell out of favor in the post-World War II years, the disillusionment of the Cold War, I think. Next one. More recently, we have hero protagonists like this. Michael Connelly, who is maybe our most successful mystery writer, has a character named Harry Bosch, and that's the guy at the top there. He's an LA homicide cop, and he is a deeply wounded man, all right? And so he is a hero protagonist, but in addition to the flaws that all protagonists should have, he's a wounded guy. He's a single parent. He can't get along with authority. His mother was murdered and dismissed. The case was basically ignored because she was a prostitute, all right? Below him there on the lower right is Robert Mitchum, the actor, playing Philip Marlowe, who is Raymond Chandler's main hero. And yet, as Philip Marlowe has been portrayed more recently, he is portrayed as an older man, a weary, world-weary man, a guy who's just trying to get by. He's taken too many shots, both of alcohol and physical abuse. And so we have gone from the kind of chipper and cheerful Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot to a darker, more wounded, more compromised, heroic protagonist. Okay, now the next one we're going to see is what we call the anti-hero. And I chose for this, I just finished reading a book on that was the book upon which the movie The Searchers was made or based. The anti-hero protagonist there is one of the great characters of not only literature, but also the cinema. His name was Ethan Edwards. That's the character's name in the story. And it takes place on the frontier. The only problem with Ethan Edwards as a hero is that he is a racist. He's an unreconstructed ex-Confederate. He's in love with his brother's wife. His brother doesn't know. He is probably a bank robber and he's wanted by the law. And yet he is thrust by circumstance into the role of hero. And the tension in the story is, how can we root for him? Well, what happens at the beginning, the inciting incident, is that his brother's ranch on the frontier is attacked and burned by Indians. His brother, his brother's wife, one of their children are killed, and his brother's oldest daughter is taken as a hostage or a captive by the Indians. Only Ethan remains. to undo that. But as we follow the story, both in literature and in the movie, we start to wonder, is he trying to rescue her, or is he trying to find her so he can kill her because he feels she's been defiled by savages? Now, you want to put your reader in the middle of a dilemma. Here's a great example of how using an anti-hero can do just that. Let's go to the next slide. Sometimes you're going to want to have multiple protagonists. And in Japanese literary and theatrical tradition, there's a story of the 7 samurai, the 7 warriors who avenge wrongs. It was made into an American movie called The Magnificent Seven. All right. And so you might choose a multiple protagonist approach where multiple heroes combine their force to defeat the guilty or to defend the innocent. Another use of a multi-protagonist, if you go to the next one, this is familiar to most people. You can use multiple protagonists who have to unite to overcome their individual limitations. And so in The Wizard of Oz, which began, of course, as a book, you have protagonists, all of whom have a weakness. You got one that doesn't have many brains, one has no heart, one has no courage, and one has no home or way of getting home. And yet, by combining forces like the Magnificent Seven, they are able to fulfill the protagonist's role in the story. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, I just started writing a book a couple of months ago, and my hero is a sociopathic killer for hire. I don't know why I did it. I do like a good challenge, but I think I was inspired by a character called Parker. Parker is the heroic antagonist in a series by a writer named Richard Stark, who is really Donald Westlake using another name. And the first story that he begins to introduce us to this antagonist is called The Hunter. And here's the blurb. She shot him just above the belt and left him for dead. Then they torched the house with Parker in it and took the money he had helped them steal. It all went down just the way they'd planned, except for one thing. Parker didn't die. And the whole story here, the mystery here, well, actually, this is really more a thriller than a mystery. But the story here is Parker hunting down each of his one-time compatriots and killing them for having attempted to kill him, for abandoning him and double-crossing him. And I remember as I read this book halfway through, I said, what the heck am I doing? I'm rooting for this guy. All right? But then you have to realize that all villains, as they say, all villains are the heroes of their own story. So you can have an antagonist, someone without redeeming social value, in the heroic role. Except you got to watch out for this. Next slide, please. Some of you may know Gone Girl, #1 New York Times bestseller. This is a contemporary example of the heroic antagonist, Gillian Flynn's book. What can I say? There isn't a sympathetic character in this book. So you got to be careful of having too much of a bad thing when you plan your mystery or your thriller. There's got to be somebody to root for some reason. And I would also recommend that you go easy on the unreliable narrator format, which has been used a lot lately and is fast, I think, becoming a gimmick. Now, we just looked at some of the options you have in drawing your major character, your protagonist. What about the minor characters? Let's go to the next slide. Sometimes when you write your book, you'll do a backstory for your major character and you got the plot ideas and then you just go charging ahead. But what about the minor characters? Every minor character, even the minor ones, I should say, is an opportunity to more deeply connect your reader to your story. So don't waste those opportunities. And consider that if your minor characters do not ring true, then the major characters who interact with them will also begin to grow unreal to your readers, because they will be reacting in a way that the reader doesn't understand, because they don't understand the characters the major characters are reacting to. All right? Consider also that minor characters can play a major role in advancing the story. Just because they're not the protagonist or the main antagonist, minor characters can have an important role to play in the twists and turns of your plot. I would urge you, before you start writing, to get to know your minor characters and to know more about them than you will ever use in the novel. I'd like to suggest that you consider using continuing minor characters to provide depth and continuity to books written as a series. All right? Use recurring minor characters. All right? Now, what I've done in my Gabe McKenna series is I have this bug about Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, okay? And I've read all the Conan Doyle stories, but it always bugged me, first of all, that Sherlock Holmes never changed. He's the same at the end of the series of stories as he was at the beginning. And Dr. Watson is simply there to chronicle the whole thing. But other than that, he doesn't have much of a role to play. So when I decided to make the Gabe McKenna mystery series, I didn't want to fall into that trap. And so what I did is I created an ensemble of characters around Gabe, and in each of the novels, one of them co-stars with him. A different one in each book has the major secondary role. And this allowed me to draw out more of Gabe's character and to give the reader a brand new, interesting character to enjoy in each of the books. So there is a power, an attractiveness to recurring characters if you're writing a series. And I think you should consider that if that's the direction you're heading. Now, how do you describe a minor character? You don't want to spend a chapter on each of these minor characters. So let me give you a few examples now. Next slide, please. You can describe a minor character through the reactions of other people. For example, I thought she was so beautiful. I figured she was the kind of woman who could make buffalo walk on up to her and give up their lives. She wouldn't have needed to hunt. Every time we went walking, birds would follow us around. Hell, tumbleweeds would follow us around. Now, there's no physical description there, is there? He says she's beautiful, but why? It's because of the way the world reacts to her, even the birds and the animals and the plants. Or you can describe a minor character through a quality the character lacks. Erskine was a little nothing of a man. the kind of guy who could walk into an empty room and get lost in the crowd. Okay? Now, you could say, hell, Erskine had no presence, no authority. Or you could say it this way, and it gets the idea, I think, across more forcefully. You can describe a minor character through cryptic physical description if you want. Quote, from 30 feet away, she looked like a lot of class. From 10 feet away, she looked like something made up to be seen from 30 feet away. Okay, that explains itself. Or through simile or comparison. She smelled the way the Taj Mahal looks in moonlight. Now that's a Raymond Chandler, and it's interesting how he kind of juxtaposes smell and sight in that, and it even has feel. Or you can do it through exaggeration. The girl gave him a look that ought to have stuck at least 4 inches out of his back. Okay, so pay attention to your minor characters. They can really flavor your story. They have to be real for the story to seem real to the reader. Okay, and one last thing, and let's go to the next slide. Keep this in mind. Your reader has no way of knowing which characters are major or minor when you first introduce them, especially when they meet them in ensemble. That's part of the mystery. Here's an example where 3 characters are introduced in one short scene. The bar's only other patron was a dark-haired, overly made-up woman who wobbled on a bar stool as she sipped a tall drink. I settled in 2 stools down. "What can I do ya?" the bartender said. There was a touch of Dixie in his voice. I ordered 3 fingers of Black Bush neat. He gave me a generous pour from a brand new 5th. My kind of guy. I nodded, raised the drink to my lips, and downed half of it in a swallow. Lowering my glass, I checked the mirror behind the bar. A young man entered the premises and swaggered to the stool nearest the door. He flexed his fingers as if his hands were sore, and he looked around. The guy wore a black Stetson rancher hat and a gray suit that held him tight. There was a bulge under the left side of his coat, but despite the swagger, he looked like a child wearing adult clothes. He grabbed some pretzels from a bowl on the bar and caught my eye in the mirror. He stared as if he recognized me. I glanced away and unintentionally made eye contact with the woman 2 stools down. It was all the encouragement she needed. "Hi there," she said, as she turned toward me and crossed her legs. The move flashed me several varicosed inches from her knee to her too short skirt. Her voice held 10,000 cigarettes in its rasp. Her hair was heavily lacquered. As she smiled, the rest of her face seemed to freeze. The softness had been squeezed out of this woman a long time ago. "My name's Angel, but I can be as naughty as you want." She coughed out a laugh and then hacked until her face turned red. "You got a name?" she asked when she could finally breathe again. "Gabriel. My name is Gabriel." "Oh, you're an angel too. That's sweet." She licked her lips. "You know, Gabe, you're an all right looking guy." I forced a smile and tried to sound polite. "Ma'am, I didn't come here to talk." She gave me the finger, turned back to her drink. "Don't mind Mary," the bartender whispered as he wiped his rag over a circular stain on the bar. He flicked his index finger over his red bulbous nose and leaned toward me. She used to be a nun. I finished my drink and headed for the door. The guy in the Stetson kept his face turned away as I passed him. But as I walked outside, I heard the definitive sound of a bar stool scrape across the floor. Okay, now there's a short scene introducing 3 new characters and one that the reader has met before, one of those three characters is going to play a critical role in the story, but the reader doesn't know that yet, and he or she doesn't know which one it is. So that's a mystery within your mystery. Okay? Let's go to the next slide. I don't want to take up too much more time here. First of all, you got to play fair with your readers. All right? Writing for a reader is an act of seduction. And you are inheriting readers who tend to have favorite mystery genres. They might pick up your book because it's in a certain section in the library or on a bookstore shelf, or they know that it's a cozy, a series. So they will come to you with certain assumptions and expectations. And each subgenre, while it allows you necessary artistic license, also carries with it that burden of meeting those assumptions on the part of the reader. Now, there are surprises, and then there are surprises. Readers will appreciate a surprising plot twist, but they don't react as well to violation of the genre's assumptions. For example, if your mystery is structured or pitched or presented as a cozy, well, you don't have a grisly chainsaw mass murderer. That violates the assumptions of the genre and the expectations of your readers. And no extraterrestrials in a noir mystery either, all right? Your mystery also needs to be solvable with sufficient information provided to the reader that they can at least have a chance to figure it out. So you can't do a Deus Ex Machina device and introduce your eventual murderer on page 250. That's not fair. Your readers won't go for that. They'll resent it. They may throw your book across the room. Okay? So you've got a balancing act that you are doing. Next slide, please. And a good mystery is a balancing act in 3 acts. You've got the story characters and you've got your readers. You have to have both of them in mind. You have to ask yourself before you start at every step of the way, who knows what and at what point do they know that? The mystery unfolds for both the reader and the story characters. And you can't let the reader get too far ahead of the characters or the characters are going to seem unreal and stupid. You can't let the characters get too far ahead of the reader or the reader will get frustrated and just resent that experience. So you have to keep it, it's like two trains going down parallel tracks. What the reader knows based on the clues you've given them and what the story characters know based on their experiences in the story itself, okay? And you got keep those 2 trains running close together. Now, quickly, so we have time for some questions. Here's your toolbox: plot twists, misdirection, dead ends, red herrings, turning convention on its head. I'm not going to go into all of this, except to ask you to consider that these tools, plot tools, character tools, descriptive tools, think of them as spices that will add zest to your novel. Be careful not to overuse them, just like you wouldn't put too much of one spice in a soup, for example. You don't want to ruin the flavor. You can't have a plot twist every 3 pages, every 10 pages. It's going to exhaust the reader. You pick your spots. You target them. You place them at points in the journey where they will have the most effect on the reader. These are not substitutes, as wonderful as they are, and I love to do a good plot twist as much as anybody, but they are not substitutes for having compelling characters, riveting dialogue, and having your own distinctive voice and style. Okay. Now, okay, last point to make here. Writing process. We could do hours comparing writing processes. I have nothing to recommend to you in this regard except two things. One is the main aspect of the writing process is rewriting. Good books are not written, they're rewritten. And you have to be willing to go over and over and over until you just can't stand it anymore, and then show that to trusted early readers and see what they think. Show that to your agent and see what she thinks or he thinks, okay? Rewriting is where the real work lies. And it takes as long as it takes. You will find your own process, what works for you. It is a trial and error thing. You might need to write 1,000 pages before you figure out the best way for you to do it. And that means best time of day, best place, best length of time, beverage of choice while you write, all of that. How do you know, I have my own peculiarities, but I can't say they would work for you. When I'm writing a mystery, I write the last page first, so I know where I'm going, but I leave it, I don't lock that door because it's never going to end up there, but at least having a last page gives me a general target off in the horizon to kind of wander toward, okay? You can talk to 10 writers and you'll get 10 different writing processes. You can talk to 100 and you'll get 100 different ones. It's a process of self-discovery. The best thing I can say is try to find out what not to do, or keep a record of what not to do. Keep a record of your mistakes and don't make the same mistake twice. Okay, I want to get to some questions. Can we go to the final slide? I have notes that I will be giving to the office at Southwest Writers. If you'd like to pick up, they'll be in PDF format. If you'd like to pick up a copy, contact the office. If you'd like to look at any of my books, I have my own publishing company now called Black Range Publishing. I'm also on Amazon. You can put in Amazon books and my name. And somebody mentioned a podcast earlier in this evening. I also have the Black Range Pub, which is my podcast. The address is right there. And I will be interviewing noted authors. I just started it last month. I got 4 shows up so far. But I'll be interviewing noted authors, mystery writers, thriller writers. So if you'd like to learn more than I was able to give you tonight, I'll be interviewing thriller writer Joseph Badal in the next couple of weeks, and that should be up on the Black Range Pub. And after the first of the year, we'll be doing a podcast with Ann Hillerman, and I'm sure she's going to have some really interesting things to say as well. The podcast is available on Buzzsprout, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, or you can connect to it through my Black Range Publishing website too.